Hello and welcome back to the podcast. So today's episode is all about combating overpricing by other agents. I know every estate agent has suddenly wanted to listen to this podcast because this is a huge problem in the estate agency world. And how do you overcome other agents who are simply just picking a figure, adding 10%, then doubling it and wowing the homeowners all the way to a 26-week contract? So this episode is all about how you overcome overvaluing by other estate agents. Now, I've had many conversations with homeowners who have had a overvaluation, should we say, on their home, and I'll always say to them, "Yeah, how did the agent get to that figure? What comparables do they show you? What sort of facts and figures do they show you to kind of support their argument?" And normally, the homeowner turns around and goes, "Well, they didn't really. They just kind of gave me the figure, and then they cleared off, and I thought that sounded like a lot of money, and we signed up and." Here we are, sort of thing. So we are going to put a process in place to overcome overvaluing within your local area. And the way we're going to do that is we are basically going to involve the homeowner in the valuing process. Now, don't worry, they're not going to value their own home. That'd be an absolute car crash and an absolute one-way street to overvaluing. But we are going to involve them in the process so they can see clearly how we've got to the figure of their home's value. So how we would do this is towards the end of a market appraisal normally, when we get to kind of the nitty gritty part of it, which is talking about fees and price and presentation, all that sort of stuff. So once you've had the tour around the property, and you can say to a homeowner, look, we've got two ways of valuing your property. Way number one is I just stand here and I just tell you what I think the property is worth. Way number two is actually I talk you through the comparables we have for your property, and actually no one knows this property like you do. You mentioned here you've lived here property for the last 20 years or so, and actually we can work through those comparables together and we can find the right price for your property to make sure you get as much money as possible. Which one of those routes do you reckon is going to be best for today? And 99.9999% of the time, they'll always go route number two. Great, fantastic. Route number two it is then. So interesting, Mrs. Jones, I've got in front of me today all the comparables for your property that I've got before we came to see the property. So I've got in front of me, and you lay them out on the table in front of you. Here's six properties that are all quite similar to your home in the current situation as we've seen it today. Now, side note here, what's really important is you put a cap on either end of that. So what I mean by that is you put a property that is more expensive, that is definitely more expensive than their home, and they're nowhere near that sort of money, and one that is cheaper than their home. So let's say, for example, you're going to value a 3-bed semi-detached house, for example. Well, put in there a 3-bed detached house at the top, or a 4-bedroom detached house at the top, or a 4-bed semi, something that is slightly better than their home, that they're not that budget sort of thing. Below that, put a property that is cheaper. So it might be a 3-bedroom flat, for example, a 2-bedroom flat, a 2-bedroom home, whatever it may be, something that is below their value. So effectively, you've got sort of a bottom stop, which is sort of the cheaper property, and you've got a top stop as well, which is the more expensive property. They're not going to kind of reach those sort of echelons of price, should we say. The rest of the comparables between the two, so let's say 5, 6 properties, whatever it may be, are pretty similar to the properties they've got. Now, the reason why it's important to have those buffers at either end, as you might imagine, it's going to reel your homeowner back in slightly. Because let's pick some really round figures here. Let's say the property is worth £300,000 or so, and they say, I think it's worth 330 because Marjorie told me so. Well, you can say, well, appreciate what you're saying, what Marjorie's saying there, but actually, if you look at this one for £330,000, we can get detached property. And I think if someone said to you, got the chance of either buying a mid-terrace property or a detached property, most people are going to go for the detached property. So it's fair to say actually we're not actually quite that high. So you've kind of just got that buffer there. As you might imagine, you use the higher buffer more than the lower buffer. Not many people are saying to you, I think it might be worth 250, and you're like, oh no, actually, honestly, it'll be worth like 300. So you'll use the top buffer more than you'll use the bottom buffer. Now, what you're effectively going to do is show the first details of the homeowner and say, great, well, here's one down the road that we sold recently or someone else sold recently. How do you think that compares with your property? And they will spend the next minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, whatever it may be, either praising that property or tearing that property apart. If they're saying to you, for example, oh, they haven't got the driveway, or they haven't got the swimming pool, or they've only got 2 beds and we've got 3 beds, for example, or they haven't done the refurbishment of the kitchen, you're kind of getting the vibe that they have an impression their property is worth more than that home is in front of them, for example. So go through each of the details and say, right, okay, fantastic. Where do you think your property sits then in this? And they'll go, well, I think it sits at around £305,000 or 310 or whatever it may be. Now, the important part of this is you're not letting the homeowner value their own property. You have an idea of the value before you walk to their front door in the same way you normally would do. You have a good understanding about where the value for the property sits. So you're basically directing the conversation into where you want the price to be. So let's say it's worth £300,000, for example. Saying to them, okay, so you're saying it's between the 291 and the 310 So we're kind of feeling about the 300 sort of direction, I presume, in that sort of situation. Yeah, okay, that sounds about right. Also, we'd like to go for a bit more. Okay, well, okay, you could potentially look at offers in excess of 300,000, for example. But you're guiding the homeowner towards where you think the property value should sit. Now, the reason you're going through all this effort is because they're kind of being part of the team. They're being sort of the valuation team of their property. So if anybody disagrees with your valuation of that home, they're disagreeing with themselves because they've gone through that process and you've sat down with them and you've agreed together that that is where the value of their property sits for their home. So if someone comes forward and says, oh, I think your property is worth £330,000, for example, they're like, hang on. I worked out with Chris and Bob the other day that my property was worth 300,000 and we went through the comparables in the local area that pointed me in that direction. So therefore, how's this person standing in front of me now and saying it's worth 330? They can't be correct because I'm correct because I worked it out 2 days ago. So this is a really key sort of differential in the way you value properties. Effectively, what you're doing is changing it from sort of what I would see almost like a preachy way of turning up and I'm the messiah of property and I say it's £300,000 because I say so. Don't dare ask me for any research off the back of it. That's just what I say it is. Through to actually, you're the homeowner of the property. This is your most expensive asset, I would imagine. Let's work through this together, even though you're weighting it behind yourself, quite obviously. Let's work through this together and see where the property value sits compared to comparables we've got at the moment. You're still going to get the same answer. So the answer, it doesn't matter whether they pick option A or option B we talked about earlier. Your answer is still going to be it's £300,000. The difference is it's not just you saying it, it's now them saying it as well. So therefore, they have bought into the idea of their property being worth £300,000 because you've worked it out together, and you know it's £300,000 because you know the local area and the market, etc. So you've come to the same result. So when someone says to you, do you want option A or option B in this situation we talked about earlier, they're both the same. It's both £300,000. The only difference is, do you want me to just tell it to you right now, or do you want to spend a bit more time of working through it together that is going to allow them to buy into the value of their property? So when you go and value homes from now on, try and involve the homeowner as much as you possibly can do. You need to put guardrails in place, which is the higher property and the lower property. So you've got kind of that protection from going too high or too low if that ever happens. But then you've got the comparables that they're talking through with them. They're invested in the value of their property because you have worked it out together. And any agent that walks to the front door who says a figure that is different to the value and figure that you have worked out with the homeowner is suddenly wrong, because the homeowner has worked it out with you. So if someone walks to the front door, as I mentioned, and says it's worth £25,000, £30,000 more, they're literally arguing with the homeowner who worked that out with you not too long ago. So that's a really good way that I've found of combating overpricing. So changing it from a preaching valuation through to a consultative valuation. So you're working it out with the homeowner exactly what their home is worth. If anyone argues with it, they're arguing with the homeowner. Hope you enjoyed today's episode. Hope that helps you in your own estate agency business, and I'll see you on the next episode.